in finding our wonderful, she's been instrumental in finding our wonderful speakers who are actual rose experts. So, Christina?
Hi. Yes, I'm really pleased to introduce Debbie Arrington as your speaker tonight, as the rose expert. Debbie is a Master Rosarian accredited by the American Rose Society, and to do so, to be accredited by the Premier Rose Society of the U.S., you have to work, almost 20, you have to be an active consulting Rosarian for a minimum of 10 years, showcasing really hands-on knowledge in rose care, including planting, pest management, and cultivation techniques. Debbie is a writer, an editor, a gardening expert, and co-creator of the daily award-winning garden and food blog called Sacramento Digs Gardening. And along with that experience, she worked almost 20 years for the Sacramento Bee as a journalist. So I'm really happy to now turn this presentation over to Debbie.
Great, thank you very much. I'm also the former president of Sacramento Rose Society, and been very active in various clubs and rose districts. And I'm an award-winning rose exhibitor. So I've got a lot of experience with roses, and I've got about 140 in the ground here at my house in Sacramento. So I have hands-on experience too. So without further ado, let me get to screen sharing here. Okay, and all righty, and it says people can see this, so that's good. All righty. Um, Okay, tonight's topic is rose care throughout the year. Christina and Terry asked me to do something that was beyond pruning and something that was more along. And I keep getting little pop-up messages in this. I'm sorry. Um, distracting. Something that was beyond basic rose pruning and something that would give master gardeners a good overview about rose care. And I also spoke to the Sacramento master gardeners a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things that was very interesting to them was that roses are an excellent plant for both water-wise landscapes and fire-wise landscapes. They are very long-lived, and once established, they can get by with only twice monthly watering or even just monthly irrigation. And they also are very tough and can be resilient in a lot of different circumstances. And today's landscapes need to be resilient too, where they can take cold, they can take heat, they can take rain, they can take drought, whatever nature throws at them, they can tolerate. And I've got to ask you guys in Mariposa, did you guys get any snow this last week when we had the storms come through?
Absolutely.
Yes, I figured you guys did. I was thinking about you because roses will take snow too. Most roses are hardy to at least 12 degrees. So, and if you give them a little, back east where they have a lot of snow, they cover them with straw and basically build them a little igloo and keep them that way. But roses, they're very adaptable. Okay. And for some reason, it is not responding to me changing. Just a sec here. Let me figure out what's going on here. Okay.
While Debbie's trying to figure that out, I realized that I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Terry Sussman, and I'm a master gardener in Mariposa County. I became a master gardener in 2022, the first class after COVID, and have been active in our organization doing workshops. And this is the first webinar that I'm involved in, and um, it's a learning process, but it seems to be exciting to see everybody that's here, seeing everybody that's interested in roses and learning about roses from Debbie. So I'm sure she'll be able to get things started in just a
Okay,
minute.
had it open twice, and I was
Oh,
clicking on the wrong one. I think
okay.
that's okay, here we go.
I
Yes.
think we're going.
I think
Okay.
we're going now.
Thanks,
Yes.
Debbie.
And I don't know how I had it open twice, but somehow I did. Um, so a little bit about the world of roses. There are more than 300 species of roses out there, including, we alluded to it earlier, Rosa californica, the wild rose of California. But most of the roses that you see are modern roses and not species roses. Of the modern roses, there are 30,000 named varieties. 3,000 of those are available in commerce, available to buy, which means there's 27,000 or more roses that have been named, but they're no longer available to buy. And that those roses most often are shared by people from one garden to another or from rose clubs where they've propagated those roses and shared them. And a lot of them are roses that rose rustlers try to find and reclaim and bring back into the availability. Um, the main group that people see, for um, excuse me, for um, when you're talking about exhibition roses and roses at nurseries and buying roses and rose clubs, excuse me, they divide the world of roses into three groups. And those are modern roses, which are your hybrid teas and floribundas and grandifloras and other roses that you commonly see in nurseries and people's gardens. There's old garden roses, and those are roses that were introduced before 1867. And we'll talk a little bit more about why 1867 was an important date in the rose world. And the other one is species roses. And those species roses are those 300 other roses other than those modern roses and the old garden roses. Now, in the rose classifications, modern roses, you have your hybrid teas, grandifloras, floribundas, mini floras, miniatures, shrubs, polyanthas, ramblers, large flowered climbers, and a couple of hybrids, the gigantea and the witcherana. And the gigantea and witcherana, those are also ramblers. They're things that are crazy wild roses that have been brought into the suburban garden and try to make behave, but they will easily grow 20 feet in a single year. Um, and those roses are descendants of roses that were grown along fence lines in Europe. They're roses that were bred to just cover a lot of territory, and they're much closer to their wild cousins than probably any of the other roses that are among the modern roses. Of the modern roses, making up more than half of that world are the hybrid teas. And hybrid teas are what people think of when they think of long stem roses, with a great big single bud, um, usually a nice scent, hopefully, stem 2 feet long or more. And the florist roses, most of the florist roses you see are hybrid teas. So that's what we think of as most people think of when they think of roses. If they imagine hybrid teas, but there's lots of different variations in the modern rose world uh, to reflect the different um, variations that roses can be. Because every rose has in it the same genetic material to make all the other roses in the world. which is kind of an interesting thing. So when you breed roses, you can breed a miniature to a miniature and get a large flowered climber. Because they all have that same genetic material inside of them. And the classifications of modern roses are not based on the breeding of that rose. They're based on whatever the person who hybridized that rose wants to register it at. So, there was a few years ago, I won the opportunity to name a rose. And the rose was the offspring of two miniature roses. One was a single miniature named Gizmo, and the other one was named Dottie Jean. And they're both little roses. And the result was something that I named Baby Luke that looked a lot like Janie Bess. It was a single pink rose. But the thing rose more than 10 feet tall every year. The roses are actually rather large. They're not miniature. They're about 2.5 inches across. And so it was registered as a shrub because it didn't fit any of the other categories. Most of what's now people say, well, aren't all roses shrubs? Well, yes, they are. But the category of shrubs and in the classification of roses, those are mostly your David Austin roses, which are roses that are they're marketed as new heirlooms. They look like roses from the Victorian age, but with disease resistance and easy care. Also, all your landscape roses are lumped under shrubs in that classification. And miniatures, it's not the height of the bush that makes a rose a miniature, it's the diameter of the bloom. And so miniature roses are roses that are less than 2 inches across. Mini floras are a little bit larger. They're about 2.5, 3 inches across, but otherwise act a lot like a miniature. And miniature bushes quite often are short, 18 to 24 inches tall. But there's an awful lot of miniatures that will grow 4 to 5 feet tall too, but just have small roses. Floribunda is a classification that came about because it's an abundance of flowers on one stem, many flowers. And they're basically thought of as like a bouquet on one stem. There'll be 6, 7, 10, 12 flowers on one stem near the end of the stem. Roses tend to bloom at the end of a stem that's called the terminal bud, where it's just blooming once at the end. Well, Floribunda, instead, they'll put a whole spray of roses at the end of that terminal bud instead of just one single bloom. And a grandiflora is a cross between hybrid teas and floribundas. They're roses that are large like hybrid teas, but they have traits like floribundas in that they produce these big bouquets of flowers on one stem. And the very first grandiflora was introduced in the 1950s. It was named Queen Elizabeth. It was right after Queen Elizabeth was crowned. All right, old garden roses. Now, these are the type of roses that you see in Victorian cemeteries. And a lot of cemeteries up in the foothills and the 49ers. These were roses that the 49ers brought to California with them. And we had an awful lot of roses that were brought to our state by pioneers, and they planted them as remembrances of home. And a lot of times they brought roses. They took a cutting from wherever they were from and put them in a potato, and the potato kept the rose stem fresh enough, and it would start to root inside the potato. And then when they got to California, they'd plant the whole thing, potato and all, and they'd have their bush. But those old garden roses are varieties of roses that were known before 1867. And they are a lot of the China roses, and most roses trace their roots back to China. Most of the roses that we're familiar with today, because China had two things that were really desirable in the rose world. They had red roses and they had yellow roses. And those are rose colors that people were really desire, that were rose hybridizers. The roses that were from Europe, originally the damask and alba roses and the gallicus, those tended to be pink or white. And so those rose colors is what they had. And so they, put the two together and they came up with a bunch of hybrids. The thing about most of the old garden roses is most of them only bloom once in spring. While the hybrid teas and floribundas and other modern roses, almost all of them are multiple bloomers, where they'll bloom repeatedly throughout the year. So some of the more famous old garden roses are listed here, and quite often these are ones that are getting more and more popular because they have great scent. People that are interested in perfume gardens, they go for the damask or the bourbon or the china because they have very strong scent. And moss also has a very strong scent. And the Portland and the original tea rose, those have strong scents too. Um, 1867 is the landmark date in rosedom because that was the date of the introduction of the first hybrid tea. And they took a hybrid perpetual and crossed it with a tea rose and came up with a pretty pink rose named Le France. And that was the first hybrid tea, and it rocked the rose world, and everything after that changed. So all the hybrid tea and the teas, they have some sort of parentage relationship with that Le France. But that's why 1867 is such an important date in how we classify roses. Now, the species roses are everything else. And that's a lot of roses. It's more than 300 species. And these are, what they're considered wild roses. These are roses that are pretty close to the way they've always grown in nature. And there are roses throughout the Northern Hemisphere in Asia, North America, and Europe, around the globe. And the most famous of the species roses is probably Rosa rugosa. It's very popular as a source of vitamin C. Those rose hips are what they use in a lot of vitamin C, and it's a very popular hedge rose. Um, Rosa californica is our wild rose here in California. Lady Banks is Rosa banksia, and there's two colors, the white or the yellow. Um, Lady Banks are some of the biggest rose bushes you'll ever see in your life. The largest rose bush on earth is a Lady Banks. It's in Tombstone, Arizona. It is 4 blocks square, and the trunk of that one plant is more than 6 feet around. I have a Lady Banks, and it goes up a 20-foot maple easy. It just they are a rose that just wants to go and go and go. The thing about Lady Banks is it has almost no prickles or thorns on it. It's a very smooth stem rose, and it creates these great big bowers of like white popcorn blooms. Rosa fotida is Austrian copper, which is a real pretty orange rose that has it was a source of orange and a lot of other roses. Eglanteria is when it has really striking hips. The hips are a long like little um, oh like little dirigibles. They're these long pointy things. And the apothecary rose is one that's very popular with herbal medicines. Now, the once bloomers versus repeat bloomers. Once bloomers, like the Lady Banks and a lot of the old garden roses, are ones that you prune them after they bloom in the spring. Everything else you prune in winter before they bloom. Now, people ask right now, here we are at the end of February, is it too late to prune? No. If you haven't pruned yet, prune. Because they no matter what time of year you do it, you need to do it at least once a year because otherwise what ends up happening is you get a lot more dieback in the plant. And the rose becomes it returns to its natural state, which is to create a thicket. Roses, if they're left to their own, devices, they become a total bramble where they just kind of grow on top of each other, and a lot of deadwood develops in the middle of the plant. And pruning, the main thing you do in pruning is to get rid of the deadwood, and to help the plant be its best plant. Why prune? Well, because it makes a healthier plant. And the when you're pruning, you're eliminating the weak and old and damaged canes. And so the plant can concentrate on its healthy canes. And the healthy canes are the ones that are going to produce the bigger and better and more blooms. And also, roses, if they're just allowed to grow, some varieties will just keep growing on top of whatever growth they had the year before, and you'll have a 15-foot bush. One of the thing about climbers is roses aren't true climbers. They are just roses that are classified as climbers are just roses that are really, really tall, and that roses that have a certain growth habit where they just want to go really big. And other roses that are, hybrid teas that might be 4 or 5 feet. If you don't prune them, they'll go, 7, 8, 9, 10 feet, after 2 or 3 years. And then you really do have a mess. So, those factors are why you try to prune and keep them in line. When you're pruning, tools are important. These are bypass pruners, and bypass pruners, the one blade passes by the other when they strike. They don't. The other type of pruners are anvil pruners, which have a little bar across one side, and the other blade just comes down on top of that bar. Well, that squeezes the stem and causes some dieback, while a bypass pruner makes a clean cut. And if you really get down to it, you want to have the sharp edge towards facing down on so it's facing towards the node. You cut just above the bud node, and the bud node is where the growth is going to come out on that stem. And the node is that little smile that's right at the base of where the leaf attached to or leaflet, because there are five little leaves on that structure attached to the stem. So you want to slice just above that, 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch, but just somewhere, just above it, because the stem is going to die back to that point. You don't want it right on top of it because it will die right through the node, but a little space right above it. When you prune, remove all the old leaves, because the old leaves contain fungal disease. We have fungus in the air everywhere. There's no getting around it. It's there. And by getting rid of the old leaves, you dramatically decrease the amount of fungus that can jump on the new leaves when spring comes. All the fungal diseases in the rose world, pretty much, are activated by temperature and moisture in the air. So they're all waiting for that first great spring day in the 70s to suddenly infect your plant with powdery mildew. So if you get rid of the old leaves, there's less of that lurking around. Also, pruning improves airflow through the plant. If you have better airflow, it's like instant sanitation of your plant. It doesn't have the opportunity for a bunch of fungus to build up, or for spider mites, which are the summer problem with roses. We've been recommending for people to prune taller. It used to be that people would prune their roses down to 6 or 12 inches, real short. And then the rose would have to spend all its energy regrowing to whatever height that particular variety wants to be. What we discovered was that roses are going to grow to a certain height, and it's whatever height that rose is predisposition to be. Hybrid teas want to be, 3 to 5 feet or more. Floribundas, they want to be, about 3 to 4 feet. So if you prune taller, such as 24 to 36 inches, instead of all the way down, the rose doesn't have to waste all its energy on growing new canes to get back to that height before it gets around to the business of blooming, which is what we want it to do. When you cut out the dead wood, you create space for new canes to form in the bush. And the new canes are what the bush is. It's a shrub, so it has multiple trunks or canes coming from a base. Most roses are grafted, so there's two parts of the plant. There's the bottom part of the plant, which is the rootstock, and then there's the top part of the plant, which is the grafted rose. Almost all roses in California are Dr. Huey, which is the most popular rootstock here in California. The other one that was gaining popularity and is used some is Forciana, which is very similar to Lady Banks. The reason those roses were chosen for rootstock is they're extremely aggressive growers, and they also have almost no prickles or thorns. So they're much easier to handle. And if you're grafting roses, you want at least one half of the rose to be easy to work with. The thing that causes rose diseases to spread throughout the garden is dirty tools. We're our own worst enemy when we're pruning because we'll get real busy and we'll just, jump from bush to bush to bush without thinking about, where our tools have been. That there might be a rose that, has a bunch of dieback and we just pruned that rose. Well, you need to disinfect your tools. And so the easiest way to do that is to take a little spray bottle of Lysol with you or some pump spray or something in the garden, or disinfectant wipes, or a little spray bottle of alcohol mixed with some water, and then just spray and wipe your blades between every bush. That way you're not spreading any germs basically from one plant to another. And the other thing, speaking of germs, make sure to get a tetanus shot. You need a tetanus shot, every 10 years. But rose prickles and thorns, they can hold disease and including tetanus. And you are going to scratch yourself. There's a good chance of that happening. So if you get your tetanus shot, then you don't have to worry about you getting an incredible, terrible infection from that. The other thing, you might notice those gloves, those are goatskin gloves. Goatskin gloves give you the best protection against roses. Rose prickles, they will go right through cowhide. But goatskin is much closer. Uh, it's the hide is tighter. When you're thinking of a cloth, it would be a tighter weave, but it's a hide, and it has just a tighter pore structure, and that keeps the prickles from entering you. And when you think about it, goats and deer and sheep, those are animals they're shorter and they're more inclined to come in contact with roses out in the wild. So they evolved where their skin is they don't get scraped so much by the rose prickles, while the cows they're bigger and they're not so interested. Choose those goatskin gloves. Those are the best gloves by far.
Okay, let's take a little break, stop here and see if
Yes.
there's any questions. So Cheryl, are there any questions?
There was one, Marianne asked that she lives at 4,000 feet elevation and
Mhm.
wanted to know when the best time to cut back her rose bushes were. I think you may have answered that, Debbie, but
Yes.
please go ahead.
I would, higher elevations where you're going to get snow. We have a cabin up at 7,200 feet. So, and there are people that grow roses around me, and what they do, is they prune in the fall or late, the early winter, November, December, before the snow comes. And in that case, you've got to protect the plant from hanging out in where it's above the snow there. And you're trying to insulate it as much as possible. So you take it down to about 18 to 24 inches and then cover it with straw, or other compost or something that will help keep it warm and insulated against the snow. And then it will be ready to grow as soon as the warm weather hits.
Great. Thanks, Debbie. That's all for now.
Okay,
Okay.
great. All right. Um, the with roses, the keys to success come down to um, pruning at the right time and feeding and irrigation. Um, I said, if you hadn't prune them anyway. People say, well, the roses already started blooming. Well, go ahead and let those roses bloom, but then prune it after that. Roses will bloom every 6 to 8 weeks from March through November. That's their bloom period. And so whenever like you put everything off, and, like life happens. Things were really busy in January and February, or the weather was terrible, and you never got out there to do any pruning. In the valley here, we try to get all our pruning done by February 14th, but at higher elevations, you really need to get it done in December. And roses naturally go dormant in the winter too, which makes them easier to prune and easier to see their structure. So those are the times to get that stuff done. Well, feeding, you don't feed roses when they're not growing. You feed them when they're growing. And roses are growing from March until November. And so, and you want them to slow down at the end of the year. So we cut off our feed in October. So you want them to naturally think about, their dormancy and hibernation, and not that they want to put out another round of blooms, because they'll just keep blooming as long as they have food and water. Um, Most rose growers feed their roses once a month in a slow release preferred format, because if you feed them a lot of rose, like people put Miracle Grow, they'll dump Miracle Grow on the roses because they think they're going to get fast and happy blooms. But what happens is the rose grows too quickly, and the cell walls are thinner, particularly in the tender end of the terminal buds, where the buds are, where the flowers are. And that cell structure is thinner, and it makes it really easy for aphids and other bugs that have noses that want to stick down through the cells and suck out the life out of your plant, to attack. And it's like they just know that those cell walls are thinner, and they just attack that tender new growth, because it really is very, very tender, because it's grown too fast. So the slow released fertilizers work a lot better. A lot of rose growers put down nitrogen as the first fertilizer when right after they see the growth coming out of the roses. And we've had a lot of warm weather as well as rain here in Sacramento. So I've had a lot of bud break already, where my roses are starting to put out new leaves. And when you see those new leaves, that's when you put out the nitrogen fertilizer. One of the favorite fertilizers for organic gardeners for roses is alfalfa pellets. They get them at the feed store. The one thing to caution is make sure they're pure alfalfa, and not alfalfa with extra vitamin and minerals, because they add molasses, and that attracts ants. And so you just want the straight alfalfa. Other high nitrogen ones are aged compost or aged manure. Those also work well, or fish tea or compost tea. Those work well. Um, in April, switch to a balanced fertilizer, or a rose fertilizer, and the rose fertilizer has more phosphate in it. That's the major difference, because phosphate is very important to creating your buds and flowers. So that's why the rose fertilizer has more phosphate in it. Rose fertilizer also tends to have certain trace minerals that help with the colors on the rose. Copper helps with the orange and reds, and so does the zinc. We don't add, people ask about Epsom salts, but we have so much manganese in our soil naturally here in Sacramento and in the foothills. We don't do that. It actually can hinder the rose instead of help it. So avoid Epsom salts unless you test your soil, and you see that you need it. Water before you feed. When all fertilizers, whether chemical or natural or organic, whatever, they need moisture in the soil to work. And if there is no moisture in the soil, they pull the moisture out of the roots of the rose to get that moisture. So make sure to water before you feed the plant. And then you water in the fertilizer too after you use it. And when you use organic, roses really benefit from mulch. It helps stabilize the moisture content in the soil around them and also keeps their roots comfortable. But use organic mulch. Like wood chips, dried leaves, straws, something like that, that gradually breaks down and feeds the soil. Don't use rocks around roses. A lot of people use rocks because they think it aesthetically looks good, but it absorbs a lot of heat, particularly in the valley here, and it cooks the roots. We did a soil test where we measured how hot it got under rocks, and they were not black rocks, they were white landscape rocks. And it was a 95-degree day here in Sacramento, and the soil thermometer measured 140 degrees underneath the rocks. So you don't want to cook the roots of your roses. Irrigation and sunlight. Roses are drought resistant, particularly if you use mulch, because it helps keep the moisture level. Roses have really deep roots. Rose roots are as deep below ground as the bush is above ground. So if you have a 4 foot, 5 foot bush, those roots are going down 4 or 5 feet deep too, and just as wide as the bush is wide above ground. So it has a large area that it can pull water in from. And once the plant is established after its first year, you can switch to where you're watering it, just a couple of times a month if you're um, conserving your water. Um, Now, roses grow more if they get watered once a week during growing season. They need the water to make those blooms, and they will bloom more, and they'll be happier, and you will appreciate your roses more if you give them regular water. Roses need full-size mature hybrid tea bush uses 5 gallons of water per week. Excuse me, and that's an important measurement to know if you put your roses on drip irrigation. That's about the same amount of water as a mature tomato plant, or 5 square feet of lawn. Um, Avoid overhead watering on roses. A lot of people have overhead sprinklers, or the type of sprinklers that just throw water out over a large area. Your lawn sprinklers or overhead sprinklers. Those get the foliage on roses wet, and that can contribute to some fungal disease outbreaks. Um, Roses grow well in containers. You need a large container for a full-size rose. If you're trying to grow a hybrid tea, give it at least a 5 gallon container. But there are lots of miniatures and mini floras and polyanthus. They all grow beautifully in 1 gallon containers or larger, and they grow great on patios. They don't need much room at all, and they're very happy. Um, the biggest hurdle that roses have for bloom is they bloom better when they get sunlight. And most roses prefer 6 hours or more a day. Now, they like it in the morning because in the afternoon they can get sunburned, and that can toast their foliage where they aren't happy, particularly down here in Sacramento. But 6 hours is generally the amount that makes the difference between bloom or no bloom. Now there are a lot more roses now that they've developed to grow in dappled shade and as little as 4 hours of sun a day. And those roses, if they're you're getting good morning sun, they can get by with 4 hours. Most of those are your shrub roses that they're growing shorter, and so they don't need as much energy to grow big and tall and strong. And they're growing smaller flowers that are closer to the ground, but they're giving you color in areas that they're normally, would just be shade. Common problems. Okay, they fall into 3 categories, and we could do a few hours on this alone. When we mentioned the Master Rosarian and our continuing education, We have to pass a whole day on each one of these. We have an 8-hour class on each of those topics. So I am going to go through these instead in just a couple of minutes. Um, we have aphids, our number one rose pest. Those are the ones that are easy to see, and those are the ones that you're first to see in the spring because they just seem to come out of nowhere and gravitate to the little buds on the end of your roses and eat. Aphids, as you know, they are herded by ants like cattle. Cattle stroke aphids to get their honeydew and feed their nest. Um, and they by stroking the backs of the aphids, they release a sticky substance that's the honeydew that is like the ant's mother's milk as far as they're concerned with their nest. And so the ants because you wonder as a rose grower how did these bugs get here? Well, the ants had the aphid somewhere else, and then they marched them up the rose, up the canes, and put them up on the top of the roses where they could keep an eye on them and where they could get that nice succulent new growth and feast on that. And then they go back and have a little line of where they stroke them and bring them back down. Um, Aphids are soft-bodied. If all you have to do is hit them with a spray of water, and they will not survive the fall. So get out the hose and just hose them off. Other home remedies that work well against aphids is garlic or dish detergent, but a detergent that like Ivory soap or Dr. Bonner's with the peppermint soap. That because those are cleaner and biodegradable and they just work better. And The best homemade aphid soap is take about 6 cloves of garlic and put it in a blender with a cup of water. Whirl it around and then strain it out. You've got your garlic juice, and then add a teaspoon of your liquid soap to that, and put that in a sprayer and fill it up the rest of the way in the sprayer with your little pump sprayer with water and mix it up a little bit and just put a little bit on the end of the buds and the aphids won't come back because they don't like the enzymes that are in the garlic and they don't like their exposure to the detergent, and the detergent also helps it stay glued to the um, buds as they grow. So that's a little homemade aphid remedy, but getting out the hose and just blasting them off, it's very satisfying. Hoplia beetles are much more problematic. Hoplia beetles, you may not know what it is when by its name, but you know the damage when you see it. Um, Hoplia beetles come out as the weather gets warmer, usually late May, right around Memorial Day. And they are attracted to light colored roses, particularly white or light pink or light yellow. And they eat holes into the center of the bud, and then they carve out the middle of the bud. And so when the flower opens, it looks like someone went through there and poked holes through all the petals in there. And that was the Hoplia beetles at work. They are one of those bugs that you just have to get them through sanitation. When you start seeing buds with holes in them, you pick them off and dispose of them. And the thing about Hoplias is they have a big run where they'll attack the garden for like about 2, 3 weeks, and then they just disappear, because they come in waves. So if you can survive that wave in late May, early June, then they'll be gone for the rest of the year. Because Hoplias also are a favorite food of many of our songbirds. And so the birds usually they discover where the Hoplias are and they take care of the problem. So then we don't have to worry about it. But there's that one period of time when they're really a pest. Leafcutter bees. Leafcutter bees they're good pollinators. They're bees. They're our friends. But they love to make line their nest with pieces of rose leaf. And what they do is they go and they cut perfectly round circles out of rose leaves, because rose leaves are just the right thickness to line their nest, and they just love it. So, and the leaf cutter bees are like carpenter bees, where they make a nest into wood and usually. Old trunks and branches and things like that. And then they make these round holes, just like boring like a drill, and then they line it with all these pieces of rose leaf. Um, it is not hurting the plant. It is just an aesthetic issue, and bees are good and they're pollinators, so just live with it. Spider mites, they are a sign of drought and dryness in summer. They become really bad in late July and August, when it gets really dry. They like dry, dusty conditions and lack of airflow. And where it's dry and dusty and down in the center of the plant, where there's not airflow and there's crossing canes and it just gets into be kind of this dark webby area, um, they just proliferate. Um, and the way to get rid of them is like with aphids, get out the hose and spray them with water. They can't take it. And you just give the plant a shower, and it gets rid of the spider mites and also refreshes the bush. And core borers, those are a bug. They're a larva that gets down into the center of the cane and kills the cane. Um, you'll see it when you'll look at a piece of dieback on a cane, and there'll be a hole in the middle of that cane at the end of it. And it will go down into the cane. That's where that borer has gone into the cane. And so what you need to do is cut below where that the bugs have invaded, and throw away that whole portion of the dyed back cane. And you have to go down about 2 inches below where you see the damage, because they may have gotten down farther than you can see from the outside. And diseases, our most common ones are fungal diseases. The big three are powdery mildew, rust, and black spot. All of them hit in spring. As soon as the weather turns 70 degrees, they come out in mass, because they're all triggered by warmer weather. Powdery mildew looks like everything's dusted with powdered sugar. It is in the air everywhere, and just waiting for the right conditions to latch on to the plant. There's a different powdery mildew for each kind of species of plant. So, like, there's powdery mildew on grapes and powdery mildew on squash, and powdery mildew on roses, and so on. They are different strains of powdery mildew, but they all act basically the same. With roses, what's kind of interesting is you can see the spore factory form before it actually explodes. And what happens is the rose leaf gets a little pucker on it, and it looks like somebody pinched it. And you'll think to yourself, well, what would cause a thing like that to happen? Well, that's the spore factory getting ready to explode. It's starting up. And so if you pinch off that pinched leaf, and dispose of it, you'll save yourself a whole explosion of powdery mildew, because you got rid of the spore factory before it was able to put out the spores. Rust is that orange stuff that appears on the bottom of leaves. That's another fungal disease. We usually see rust outbreaks in the fall, but if you didn't take off the old leaves from when you were pruning, or you didn't prune at all, rust will gravitate to the new growth in spring, and you'll have a bad outbreak of rust right off the bat in March and April. And the other one that's really common is black spot, which sounds just like its name. It's a bunch of black spots on leaves that look real raggedy. They usually start out as yellow and then gradually turn black as the leaf dies and necrofies. All three of those things will not kill a plant, but they will defoliate it because that's how the plant deals with it. Is it those fungal diseases will kill those leaves, gradually cut down on the leaves' efficiency with making new energy for the plant through its chlorophyll and stuff because that's what it's preying on is the the um, the chlorophyll and other parts of the leaf. So the plant drops the leaves and sprouts new ones. But if those old ones aren't cleaned up underneath the plant, the fungal disease will jump back onto the plant and start anew. So when you see these outbreaks of fungal disease, go ahead and strip the infected leaf off the plant so the plant can get around to growing new leaves faster. And if those leaves fall down underneath the plant during the winter, when you're pruning, or just during the summer or whenever, pick those up also, because otherwise those fungus diseases will want to get back onto the plant. Now, the good news is all those different fungal diseases are killed by 90-degree weather. And here in Sacramento, at least, we get up to 90 degrees pretty quick. And so as soon as we get up to 90 degrees, all those fungal diseases are gone because they can't reproduce when it gets hotter. And that's one way, to also to knock them out is to make sure the plant has got enough sun so it will feel the warmth. Now, botrytis is well known to people who grow grapes. It's also known as gray mold, but it's not gray. It's in roses. It turns the rose bloom itself into a bunch of brown mush. It is really active in the fall, and what it does is it infects the bloom, and when the bloom first gets infected, a white or light pink flower will look like it has the measles. There'll be all these little red spots all over the bloom, and your first thought was, "Oh, that's interesting. It looks like a spotted rose." But instead of developing, the rose will just kind of rot in place, and because it's turning into mold with the botrytis. And that's another one that is everywhere. You can't do anything about it other than sanitation. When you see it start coming through the garden, to go ahead and pick those infected blooms and get rid of them. But that's the one that you'll see in October into November. You won't, you rarely see it this early in the year. And stem cankers are another one where um, you'll see you'll see a healthy green cane or stem, and it will have these purple blotches on it. And what those cankers are from is those are injured cells on the outside of that cane, and they ruptured for one reason or another, and the different fungal disease gets into those wounds and causes little sores, little ulcers. It's very common with roses exposed to frost. And like we had this situation here in Sacramento where we had very warm days where we were in the 70s. Roses started putting out new canes and lots of new growth. And then we had this last week nights that were down right around freezing. And in several places in the foothills, we're below 30 degrees. That caused ruptures on the outside of the stems or the canes, and so now they're purple spots. So where they were nice and green, they're now purple, and those are going to cause these little avenues for fungal disease to get into that plant. And what ends up happening is that that cane or stem will die back. It will just the plant will take care of it by killing it. So if you see that happening on a stem or cane, go ahead and cut it out because it's will just allow the plant to get back to growing a new cane faster. And I should say canes are growth that are coming from the base of the plant, while stems are coming from higher up in the plant off a cane. Environmental stresses. That's the other third area. Uh, Plants can get sunburned, and particularly here in Sacramento, it gets 100 degrees in the summer. If they're in full sun, people say plant your roses in full sun, and so they plant them where they're getting sun from dawn to dusk. Well, that's too much sun for a lot of plants, particularly red roses. They'll get a lot of burn on their leaves, where their leaves look brown and crunchy, and the bloom itself can get kind of brown and burned, sunburned. Um, Too much shade. The rose doesn't bloom because the trees around it have gotten too big. Quite often, people plant roses in winter because that's the good time to plant them when they're dormant, where there are deciduous trees, and they don't realize that those trees are going to have leaves, and those what looked like a sunny spot is not going to have any sun during the summer when you need the sun for that rose to generate their blooms. Water. Either lack of water or too much water. Both of them look the same when you're diagnosing the rose. Yellow leaves. The rose will start turning very yellow and dropping leaves. That can be because it's not getting any water at all. And quite often with drip irrigation, there may be a problem where something happened with the roots, got tangled up, or there's a clog in the line or whatever, and the rose is not getting any water. Or there'll be a situation where you have clay soil and you got a lot of water building up around the roots. Where there's not good drainage, because roses need to have good drainage. They do not like to stand in water. They can survive a lot of water as long as there's good drainage in the soil. But both of them are going to cause the leaves to go yellow and drop off. So then you have to test the soil, take a screwdriver, stab it into the ground, see if it will go in, and take a trowel, look at the soil. Is the soil too moist or is it dry? And when you set up drip irrigation with the plant, make sure that there are emitters on multiple sides of the plant, not just on one side. Ideally you'd have it on all four sides, but at least on two, because the rose is going to grow towards the water. So you need to have the water on more than one side to get the rose to have balanced growth. Another major environmental stress is exposure to Roundup. Roses are extremely sensitive to glyphosate, and what it does is cause them to look like they have a couple of different rose diseases, rose rosette in particular, where they get crazy growth. Instead of having a nicely formed bud, that opens up into a nice, pretty rose, it looks like the plant out of Little Shop of Horrors. Agnes, I think isn't anyway, where it's just crazy, and it looks all deformed and monstrous. They also call that Fantasia, with a where and there's some varieties that will get that multi-weird head without exposure to Roundup, but Roundup will cause roses to go weird for 2 to 3 years, just after a little bit of air drift of Roundup exposure. So don't ever use any Roundup around your roses. And part of how glyphosate works is it attacks the terminus growth. And your rose buds are terminal growth. So it kind of makes sense why roses would be so sensitive to that.
Okay, how about if we stop here? And before
Okay.
you go on, let's see if there's any questions. Cheryl, are there any questions?
There are. Christina asked to explain the rose rustler.
Oh, a rose rustler. Um, Rose rustlers are people who are rose collectors, and they look for them, particularly in places that have been abandoned. And so old farmhouses, old farmsteads, old hedgerows, old cemeteries, particularly, in ghost towns or gold mining towns. Roses were often grown as a souvenir of home by miners. And so they plant a rose where they made their encampment or their cottage or cabin out in the wilderness. And the roses have been incredibly hardy. There are roses that are more than 150 years old in them their hills. And so rose rustlers are looking for those old roses to get a cutting from them and to try to grow it out and figure out what it is. And if they can't figure out what it is, if it's not a known named rose, they might get to name it as a found rose. We have several old rose collections around California where people have rustled up roses. One of the best around here right now is up at the Woodland Library in Woodland. We had an excellent one at the Old City Cemetery here in Sacramento, but the city decided to cut down all the roses. So that was really bad situation since we had all these historic roses there. But that's what the rose rustlers are, and most of rose rustlers are involved in Heritage Roses, which is the name of the Old Garden Rose Group.
Great. And then the only other remaining question right now is from Kimberly, and she asks, would most of this advice apply to our native roses like woods rose?
It would, yes, it would. The one thing would be to prune it after it blooms, and the Rosa californica is only blooms once. Um, but some of the other roses that are multiple bloomers, you would prune them in winter, but the other ones you would treat it like an old garden rose where you'd prune it after it blooms.
All right, thank you. And let's go on to our year-round plan.
Okay. Um, Roses are not hard. They are a lot easier than a lot of other plants. Um, but they have a mystique about them. And part of that was for years, people were very much into the idea of better gardening through science, where they would spray the hell out of plants to try to get ahead of fungal disease and pest and other things. But what ends up happening with that is you kill your good insects as well with the bad, and most fungal diseases, the fungicides didn't work on them anyway, and the same thing with miticides against spider mites. So I've had a no spray garden for more than 35 years. And most of our rose growers in our Rose Society do have no spray gardens. And the way they keep ahead of pest and disease is they keep a good eye on their garden. And you know that you the big chore for your roses is to prune them in winter while they're dormant. Switch out the mulch because that way you will get rid of most of the fungus that's underneath the rose that's lurking there in the mulch, waiting to get back onto the new growth. If you clean the mulch out every year, um, you're getting rid of all those fungal diseases that are looking below it. Then the rest of it is basically just keeping an eye on your roses. Um, so January, February is a pruning and cleanup. In March, you're giving them a nitrogen boost. In April, you feed them when the first roses appear. And roses are on a 6 to 8 week bloom cycle. So if you deadhead them, which is clipping off the old roses, they will bloom dependently 6 to 8 weeks. If you have a big event coming up, say in August, prune your roses 8 weeks before that, and they'll bloom during your event. So because you can pretty much depend on it, they'll that 6 to 8 week cycle. So through the year, you're basically, feeding, deadheading, feeding, deadheading, feeding, deadheading. And with that, you're going to get 4 waves of roses during the year, because you're giving it a regular feed cycle and a regular deadheading cycle can produce 4 different waves of roses. Now, in the fall, you let the rose hips form. Rose hips are the rose's fruit. And roses, they're a member of the stone fruit family. They're relatives of apples and plums. And when you look at a rose and the stamens and the particularly with single roses, you can see the similarity between it and fruit tree blossoms. They're very similar. And fruit trees are all programmed by nature to make fruit. That's their ultimate goal is to make fruit. And rose hips are the fruit of the rose. So once a rose starts forming hips, it's not interested in forming more flowers. It wants to get those hips done. So at the end of the season, when you want the rose to go dormant, that's when you let it to go ahead and form its hips. And that way it's to signal the rose, okay, you're finally able to get some rest. You're finally going to complete your cycle. You're going to be able to create your fruit, and then you're going to be able to get some rest. And so is the rose gardener. Now, here's a little show and tell and discussion so people can take their mute off for this. We had a poll of our different rose societies here in Northern California, and we've got more than 12. So it's a lot of different rose growers, hundreds of us. And we asked them, what was their most popular rose? What was their favorite rose to grow? And this rose was won in a runaway. And can anybody guess what this rose is?
Spectacular.
Any guesses? Okay, this rose is named Secret. So you can make lots of jokes about the name. It's no secret. Secret is our favorite. It's a hybrid tea. It's a beautiful rose. The more heat it gets, the pinker it gets. Its first blooms in spring are very creamy with just the slightest bit of pink on the edges, but as it gets warmer in summer, it develops more and more pink along the edges. But one of the reasons people in rose societies love it is because it puts out these perfectly formed buds with a tight middle in the center where it has that spiral in the middle. And when you look at it from the side, it looks kind of like a pyramid. Those are all characteristics that people that show roses really like to have in a rose. So that's the most popular rose in Northern California. Now, the most planted rose in all of California is this white floribunda. Can anybody name this one? Alrighty. There's iceberg. Yes. Iceberg. Iceberg is the most planted rose in California. And there's several reasons for this. Iceberg was originally introduced in the 1950s. At a time when California was rapidly growing, when we were building a lot of new communities, particularly down in Southern California. Iceberg is one of the few white roses that is pollution resistant. No matter how smoggy it gets, no matter how much exposure it gets to car exhaust, that white stays white. Most white roses that are exposed to pollution and too much carbon monoxide will get a kind of a gray look and speckle to it, and they'll look sick. They'll look like they have botrytis or something. But iceberg stays that pretty white. It has very few thorns or prickles on it, so it has very smooth, easy canes, and the nodes are very close together. So you can prune iceberg with hedge clippers, which makes it a great rose for landscapers. It tends to stay short. It stays pretty much under 3 feet. And it is not patented anymore. Roses are patented for 25 to 27 years, depending on which year that they were introduced. During the time that they are patented, the breeder of that rose gets a certain percentage of whatever that rose is sold for. So there's always they get a revenue stream. When the patent runs out, that rose becomes what they call a non-patent rose, which means anybody can grow that rose and sell it and not pay anybody else for it. And so because iceberg is a non-patent rose, anybody can grow it. So that makes it very popular with Home Depot and Lowe's and all the big box stores, as well as your major nurseries. So that's why iceberg is the most planted rose in California. Now, the most common rose in California is a mistake for most gardeners, and it's because something else died back. Can somebody name me this rose?
Is it Dr. Huey?
You got it. Yeah, Dr. Huey is that rootstock, and all those grafted roses, all our millions of roses that are out there, they're all sitting on top of Dr. Huey. And if the rootstock is allowed to go ahead and put a bunch of canes up, it will overwhelm the graft and take over the plant. When people say, "I had a white rose and now I have a red one," it's because of Dr. Huey. Or they say, "My rose has got two different colors on it. One is yellow and one is red." One of them is Dr. Huey. Dr. Huey is a pretty little rose. It's this little red rose. It was originally introduced at the turn of the 20th century. It was from Luther Burbank, who did so many other hybridizing things, and Dr. Huey was a friend of his. And Burbank realized that this was a great rose for grafting because it had so few prickles on it and nice smooth canes, and it was very fast growing and made a great rootstock. It's a single bloomer. It only blooms in spring, and it's also a powdery mildew magnet. It gets powdery mildew like nobody's business. It is a rambler, and that's why if you let it go, it will just grow these wild, crazy canes everywhere. Ramblers, their natural growth pattern is to go 20 to 30 feet per year. The most beautiful rose in the world. Now, this might be some controversy because it was named the most beautiful rose in the world fairly recently, just last year, at the International New Rose Competition in France. And they were looking only at roses that were introduced after the year 2000. So, can anyone name what this rose is?
Peace?
No. Peace was introduced in 1948, right after
Oh,
World War II.
right.
So
Okay.
that's why it's Peace Rose. But this rose does have peace in its lineage. There is peace in its breeding,
Oh,
and you can see that purple, that kind of yellow pink combination in it. Like blends. A lot of blends have peace somewhere in their breeding because peace brought together that yellow pink combination.
mm-hmm.
This rose here is named Julie Andrews after the actress. And Julie Andrews is a great rose lover, and she's a big benefactress of the New York Botanical Garden Rose Garden. And they named this rose after her. It was originally released as something else. It was originally named Pink Paradise. But now it's marketed as Julie Andrews and hybrid tea, and it won the International New Rose Competition's Most Beautiful Rose in the World competition just last year. They named it the most beautiful rose of the 21st century. And at that same conference, they picked a rose as most fragrant. And this is another hybrid tea that was introduced in 2020, and its name is Perfume Factory. And it's a hybrid tea that has the look of a old garden rose in that it has a ton of petals. And one of the keys in fragrance to roses is petals, is a number of petals. Rose scent is at the very base of a petal. It's not down in the stamens. It's at the base of the petal where the petal is attached to the rose itself. And the more petals in a rose, the more likely it is to be fragrant. Now, for that fragrance to come out, the rose has to open. And most florist roses don't have any scent because those roses are bred to open very slowly or not at all. Because most florist roses that you see in a florist shop or the supermarket, those roses have been off the plant for 2 to 3 weeks before you bought it. Okay, and it's stayed a nice tight bud that whole time. Roses left on the bush in nature, they should open in less than a week. So, when you have a lot of petals, the more petals, the more scent, so those are generally the roses that have the most fragrance. And there's a little recap of those. You see a secret introduced more than 30 years ago, iceberg in 1950s, floribunda, but it had that ability to withstand pollution, and that's what made it so planted all over California. Dr. Huey, our Julie Andrews, and Perfume Factory. For more information on roses, the American Rose Society is a great resource at rose.org. And for information about pest on roses, the UC has a wonderful resource, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, the IPM, and there's the shortcut to that.
Well, thank you so much. Are there any more questions, Cheryl?
Not in the Q&A.
Okay. Well, Debbie, that was an amazing presentation. There was so much to learn and so much information. And I know that you have a handout that you've prepared, and
Yes,
everybody also has the PowerPoint. So we have all that information, and
yes,
the handout will be delivered emailed to you to the participants
participants, yes.
um, after this presentation.
And
I didn't
the
know if you wanted to
handout
say
is
anything about that.
yeah, and the handout includes a lot of information about pruning. It's the brochure that we give to people at our pruning workshop that we hold in January.
Oh, great. Right. Because I think that's one of the things that people are really interested in is how to prune, when to prune, what the right way to prune, and all those things. So
Well,
that'll be great.
you guys up there, you're at higher elevation, and higher elevation can wait longer to prune. So you are still totally in the pruning window. So, if you haven't pruned yet, go ahead and prune now.
Great. Also, participants will be receiving the recording of this presentation. It takes about 2 weeks for that to happen, but look for that in your email. And also, you're going to receive from UC a survey asking for your feedback about this seminar. And in addition, we're hoping that you will tell us if you have any ideas for future webinars, because that's part of what we do in our outreach and our educational programs is to find out what you want to learn about and see what we can come up with in order to present that. Speaking of webinars, we have another one coming up. It's going to be April 14th, and the title is Perennial Vegetables, Plant Once, Harvest Forever. So that's a topic that we really haven't talked about too much because we mostly talk about vegetables that are just annuals, but there are quite a few that are perennials. And so you'll want to look for the flyer on that one and sign up for that one. And also, we have our Master Gardener plant sale coming up on the 25th of April at the fairgrounds. And hopefully, you guys who are participating already know about that and have joined us other years. And so we look forward to hearing from you or seeing you at our plant sale on April 25th. So that's about it. Thank you all for coming. Thank you again, Debbie, for a great presentation. And I guess we have, it looks like we have one question.
Okay.
Cheryl, do you want to, oh, it disappeared. So maybe
Okay.
we don't have a question.
It's people commenting on how great this event was
Okay.
and
Thank
and
you.
and thanking everyone for it. Yeah.
Oh,
Especially
great.
All right.
Debbie.
Okay. Thank
Great.
you very much.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, I'll let you guys get 5 minutes back your time. So
Thank you so much.
great. Hey,
Good
thank
night.
you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.